Judge Victoria Harmon slammed her palm on the bench so hard the microphone squealed. "I speak 11 languages," David Thompson said quietly, his handcuffs clinking against the wooden rail. The judge threw her head back and laughed, not a polite chuckle, a roar that shook her entire body. "And I'm the Queen of England." The courtroom erupted in laughter. Prosecutors, jurors, even the bailiff smirked. David didn't flinch. He looked her dead in the eyes. "Give me 5 minutes, Your Honor. Just 5. And I'll make you apologize in front of everyone." Her laughter stopped cold. What happened next would destroy. Careers expose a decades-old conspiracy and reveal that David's dead father had been hiding a secret worth killing for. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The handcuffs were too tight. David Thompson felt the metal biting into his wrists as the sheriff's officers pushed him through the double doors. He'd asked them twice to loosen the cuffs. They'd ignored him both times. Story of his life, really. People had been ignoring David Thompson for 38 years. He could feel hundreds of eyes drilling into his back as he walked toward the defendant's dock. The courtroom was packed. Standing room only. Journalists lined the walls with their notepads ready. Someone in the gallery whispered loud enough for him to hear. "That's him. The fraud." David kept his head down, not because he was ashamed, because he'd learned a long time ago that looking people in the eye only invited trouble when you came from where he came from. "All rise!" The bailiff's voice boomed through the room. Everyone stood as Judge Victoria Harmon swept in through the side door. She was a small woman, maybe 5'3", but she carried herself like she was 7 feet tall. Silver hair pulled back tight, reading glasses perched on her nose, and that look David had seen on 1,000 faces throughout his life. The look that said, "I already know everything I need to know about you." "Be seated," Harmon ordered. David remained standing between two officers. His court-appointed lawyer Michael Torres stood at his left. Torres was a tired man in his 50s with coffee stains on his tie and the haunted eyes of someone who'd seen too many innocent people go down. "Case number 2024-CR-4471, the clerk announced. "The People versus David Marcus Thompson. Charges include obtaining financial advantage by deception, identity fraud, and aggravated fraud, totaling approximately $200,000. The whispers in the gallery intensified. David heard the word "con man" float through the air like poison. Prosecutor Elena Mitchell rose from her seat. She was the kind of woman who'd never worked a day of hard labor in her life. Perfectly manicured nails, designer suit, that private school accent that immediately told you she'd grown up with silver spoons and trust funds. "Your Honor," Mitchell began, her voice dripping with practiced compassion. "What we have before us today is a cautionary tale, a story of desperation leading to deception." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "For the past 3 years, Mr. Thompson has been operating what can only be described as an elaborate con. He posed as a certified professional translator, offering his services to multinational corporations, educational institutions, and most troublingly, government agencies." Mitchell walked slowly in front of the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. He collected nearly $200,000 for translations he claimed to perform in 11 different languages. She let out a small laugh. 11, Your Honor, Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, German, French, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, Italian, Hebrew, and Vietnamese. She turned toward David with that smile. The one that pretended to be sympathetic, but was really just condescension wearing a mask. "Mr. Thompson is a single father. We understand that. We understand that financial pressure can make people do desperate things. But fraud is fraud, Your Honor." She gestured toward David like he was an exhibit in a museum. "And the reality is, this man has no university degree, no professional certifications, no formal training in any language. According to our records, he barely graduated high school." David's jaw tightened. He could feel Torres shifting nervously beside him. "So how," Mitchell continued, "does a man with no qualifications convince major corporations to pay him thousands of dollars for translations?" She picked up a thick folder from her desk. "The answer is simple. He's a very good liar." "Objection." Torres's voice was uncertain. "Counsel is presenting opinion as fact." Judge Harmon barely glanced at him. "Overruled. Continue, Ms. Mitchell." Mitchell smiled. "Thank you, Your Honor. As I was saying, Mr. Thompson grew up in public housing. His father was a janitor, a cleaner. He has no history of international travel, no record of formal language education. Nothing, absolutely nothing to suggest he possesses the abilities he claims." She held up the thick folder. "We have statements from 3 clients who paid Mr. Thompson for translations that were, in their words, completely unusable. We have evidence of falsified credentials. We have a pattern of deception stretching back years." Mitchell set the folder down and faced the judge directly. "The people request that Mr. Thompson be held without bail pending trial. He's a flight risk, Your Honor, a con man with nothing to lose." Judge Harmon nodded slowly, flipping through papers on her desk. "Thank you, Ms. Mitchell." She looked up at Torres with the kind of disinterest that told David everything he needed to know about how this was going to go. "Does the defense have anything to say?" Torres cleared his throat. His hands were trembling slightly. Too much coffee, not enough sleep. Too many cases, not enough wins. "Your Honor, my client maintains his complete innocence. The charges against him are based on misunderstandings and inadequate investigation. Mr. Thompson is prepared to demonstrate that he possesses every capability he has claimed." Harmon's eyebrows shot up. For the first time, she actually looked interested. "Demonstrate?" She leaned forward. "And how exactly does he plan to demonstrate that he speaks 11 languages? Is he going to perform a magic trick for us? Maybe pull a rabbit out of a hat while reciting Shakespeare in Mandarin?" Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Mitchell covered her mouth, trying to hide her smile. Even some of the jurors chuckled. "Your Honor, with respect," Torres tried to continue. "Mr. Torres." Harmon cut him off with a wave of her hand. "I've read this file. Your client is 38 years old. He grew up in the Westbrook housing projects. His father was a janitor who cleaned office buildings until he dropped dead of a heart attack." She took off her reading glasses and stared directly at David. "There's no record of higher education, no international certifications, no evidence whatsoever that this man could speak 3 languages, let alone 11. She pointed at him. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to give you some free advice. Take whatever deal the prosecution offers you. Plead guilty. Do your time. Because if you waste this court's time with some kind of circus performance, I will personally ensure you receive the maximum sentence." David felt something shift inside him. It was a feeling he'd known his whole life. That hot, tight sensation in his chest whenever someone looked at him and saw nothing. Whenever someone heard where he came from and made assumptions. Whenever someone glanced at his work boots and his calloused hands and decided they already knew his whole story. He'd been swallowing that feeling for 38 years. He was done swallowing. "Permission to speak, Your Honor." His voice came out clear and strong, stronger than he expected. The courtroom went quiet. Even Mitchell looked surprised. Defendants didn't usually speak during preliminary hearings. They sat there and let their lawyers do the talking and hoped for the best. Harmon stared at him like he'd just sprouted a second head. "Excuse me. I said permission to speak." David met her eyes. "You've been talking about me for the past 20 minutes, making jokes, laughing. You've got a whole room full of people who've already decided I'm guilty based on nothing but where I grew up and what my father did for a living." "Mr. Thompson." Torres grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back. David shook him off. "I'm not a con man, Your Honor. I'm not a fraud. I speak 11 languages fluently, and I can prove it right here, right now, if you'll give me the chance." The silence that followed was so complete that David could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. And then Judge Victoria Harmon did something no one expected. She laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a controlled smile. She threw her head back and let out a roar of laughter that shook her entire body. It was the kind of laugh you'd expect from someone watching a comedy show, not from someone sitting on the bench of the most important court in the state. "Oh my God!" Harmon gasped, wiping tears from her eyes. "This is absolutely priceless. Did you hear that, Ms. Mitchell? The defendant wants to prove he speaks 11 languages. Right here, right now, in my courtroom." Mitchell was laughing too. So were several people in the gallery. The sound bounced off the walls surrounding David like a wave of humiliation. "Your Honor." Harmon continued, still chuckling. "I've been on this bench for 22 years, and I have never had a defendant try to pull something this ridiculous." She leaned forward, her laughter fading into a cold, hard smile. "Let me tell you something, Mr. Thompson. I grew up in Boston. My father was a surgeon. I went to Harvard Law. I've spent my entire life surrounded by educated, accomplished people. And in all that time, I've met exactly 3 people who could speak more than 5 languages fluently. 3. And all of them had PhDs in linguistics." She pointed at him again. "You're a cleaner's son from the projects. You want me to believe you speak more languages than most university professors?" Her smile turned cruel. "That's not impressive, Mr. Thompson. That's sad. It's pathological. You've actually convinced yourself of your own lies." David didn't flinch. 5 minutes, he said quietly. "That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes to prove what I can do. And why should I waste 5 minutes of this court's time? Because if you don't, and I'm telling the truth, then you just denied an innocent man the chance to defend himself." David paused, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "And that, Your Honor, would make you the fraud, not me." The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the journalists stopped writing. Judge Harmon's face went through a series of expressions. Shock. Then anger. Then something that might have been grudging respect. Then back to anger. "You've got nerve," she said slowly. "I'll give you that. Nerve and absolutely no sense of self-preservation." She looked at Mitchell. "Counselor, any objection to letting the defendant humiliate himself?" Mitchell shrugged elegantly. "Not at all, Your Honor. In fact, I think it will only strengthen our case." Harmon turned back to David. That cold smile returned. "All right, Mr. Thompson. You want your 5 minutes. I'll give you something better." She leaned back in her chair. "I'm going to bring in 11 professors from the state university, 1 specialist in each of the languages you claim to speak. And I'm going to tell them to be as rigorous as possible. No softball questions, no easy tests. Real professional evaluation." She paused. "And when you fail, because you will fail, I'm going to add charges of contempt and obstruction of justice to your case. You'll be looking at an extra 5 years minimum. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand." "And you still want to proceed?" "Yes." Harmon shook her head in disbelief. "Fine. This hearing is adjourned for 3 days while I arrange the evaluation. Bailiff, take Mr. Thompson to the holding facility." She banged her gavel and stood to leave, but stopped at the door. "Mr. Thompson." David looked up. "I've been doing this job for over 2 decades. I've seen every kind of con artist, every kind of liar, every kind of desperate person trying to talk their way out of trouble." She smiled that cold smile one more time. "And I've never not once been wrong about someone." She paused. "You're going to wish you'd taken the deal." The holding cell smelled like disinfectant and despair. David sat on the thin mattress, staring at the concrete wall, replaying the hearing in his mind. The laughter, the mockery, Harmon's absolute certainty that he was lying. "Hey." A voice from the next cell. David looked up to see an older man with gray hair and tired eyes watching him through the bars. You're the language guy, right? The one who told off Judge Harmon. David nodded. Man. The guy whistled low. Word travels fast in here. Everyone's talking about you. Said you looked her right in the eye and called her a fraud. Something like that. That took guts. The man moved closer to the bars. Name's Derek. Derek Murphy. Been in and out of places like this most of my life. Never once saw anyone talk to Harmon like that. She's got a reputation, you know. They call her the Hammer. She's ended more careers and destroyed more lives than anyone else on that bench. David didn't respond. He was too tired to talk. So is it true? Derek pressed. You really speak 11 languages. 12, actually. Derek laughed, but it wasn't a mocking laugh. It was the laugh of someone genuinely surprised. 12. Then why'd you only say 11? Because nobody asked about the 12th one. Derek studied him for a long moment. You're not like the other guys in here, are you? Most people who end up on Harmon's docket. They're either guilty as sin or too scared to fight back. But you actually believe you can beat her. I don't believe anything, David said quietly. I know what I can do. I've known it my whole life. The problem is, nobody else has ever bothered to find out. So tell me. Derek sat down on his own bunk, settling in like he had all the time in the world. How does a guy from the projects end up speaking 12 languages? That's not exactly a common skill set around here. David was quiet for a long time. The question brought back memories he'd spent years trying to bury. Memories of his father. Memories of those big, empty houses they used to clean together. Memories of the children he'd played with and the families he'd loved and lost. My father, David finally said. His name was James. He came to this country with nothing. Couldn't speak a word of English. Got a job cleaning offices at night. Learned the language one word at a time. He paused, the memories washing over him. After a few years, he got better work. Started cleaning houses for diplomatic families, ambassadors, consuls, trade representatives, people from all over the world who were stationed here for a few years at a time. Fancy gig. It was steady work, good pay, and the families, they were different from what you'd expect. Most of them treated my dad with respect. Some of them even became friends. David looked down at his hands. The same hands that had held mops and brooms alongside his father for years. When my mom died, I was 5. My dad didn't have anyone to leave me with, so he brought me along, every night, every weekend, every holiday. I grew up in those houses, Derek. While my dad was cleaning, I was playing with the family's kids. And that's how you learned. That's how I learned. The Schmidt family taught me German. The Dubois family taught me French. The Chen family taught me Mandarin. The Al-Rahmans taught me Arabic. David's voice grew distant, lost in the past. Every 2 or 3 years, the families would rotate out. New country, new assignment. I'd lose the friends I'd made, the people I'd come to think of as family. And then a new family would arrive speaking a new language, and I'd start all over again. That must have been hard, Derek said quietly. Losing people like that, over and over. It was. David nodded slowly. But it was also a gift. Every language I learned, every family I loved, they became part of me. I carry them with me everywhere I go. Derek was quiet for a moment, processing what he'd heard. So, what happened? Why are you here? David laughed bitterly. Because I made the mistake of trying to use what I know. I tried to get jobs with translation agencies, but they all wanted degrees, certifications, proof. Nobody would even let me take a test. So you started your own business. Offered my services online, charged less than the big agencies, did twice the quality work. And someone reported you. 3 someones. Corporate clients who decided it was easier to blame me for their own problems than admit they'd made mistakes. David leaned back against the wall. The thing is, Derek, my translations were perfect, every single one. I triple-checked everything. But it doesn't matter to people like Judge Harmon. I'm just a cleaner's son who got too big for his britches. They don't want to know if I'm telling the truth. They've already decided I'm guilty. So prove them wrong. Derek's voice was firm. You've got 3 days. Use them. That's the plan. No, I mean really use them. Not just sitting here feeling sorry for yourself. Prepare. Study. Get ready for whatever those professors throw at you. David looked at him. Why do you care? Derek smiled. A sad, knowing smile. Because I've been where you are. Not the language thing, but the feeling of nobody believing you. The feeling of the whole system stacked against you. And I've spent most of my life watching guys like us get crushed by people like Harmon. He stood up and moved back to the bars. But every once in a while someone comes along who actually has a chance to beat them. And when that happens, man, it gives the rest of us hope. David didn't know what to say. In his whole life, he couldn't remember a stranger believing in him like this. Get some sleep, Derek said. You're going to need it. The next morning, David was transferred to the county facility. His new cell was smaller than he expected. 2 bunks, a sink, a toilet, and a window so high it only served as a reminder that the sky existed, but he couldn't reach it. His cellmate was already there when he arrived. A man in his 60s with silver hair and deep lines carved into his face by years of hard living. You, David? The man asked without looking up from his book. Yeah. I'm Raymond Chen. They told me you were coming. He finally looked up, studying David with sharp, intelligent eyes. You're the one who's going to take on 11 professors in 3 days. Word travels fast. Word's about all we've got. Raymond closed his book and set it aside. So what's your plan? My plan. For the evaluation, Harmon's going to stack the deck against you. She's probably already called the university and told them to send their toughest examiners. You ready for that? David sat down on the top bunk. I've been speaking these languages my whole life. I don't need to prepare. Bullshit. The word hung in the air between them. Excuse me? Raymond stood up, and despite his age, there was nothing frail about him. I said bullshit. You think speaking a language conversationally is the same as being tested by professors? They're not going to ask you to order coffee in French or give directions in German. They're going to hit you with technical vocabulary, legal terms, medical terminology, scientific jargon, the kind of stuff that takes years of specialized study to master. David felt his confidence waver slightly. He hadn't thought about that. How do you know so much about language testing? Because I used to be a professor. Raymond's mouth twisted into a bitter smile. Linguistics department at Columbia, 30 years, until I made some bad decisions and ended up in here. You're a linguist. Was. Now I'm just another inmate counting down the days. He walked to the small shelf bolted to the wall and pulled down a stack of worn books. But that doesn't mean I can't help you. He handed the books to David. German legal texts, French medical terminology, Arabic scientific papers. How did you... I've been here a while, made some friends, called in some favors. Raymond sat back down on his bunk. Look, I don't know if you're telling the truth about speaking 11 languages. Honestly, I don't care. What I do know is that Harmon is a snake, and the system she represents has destroyed too many good people. He looked at David with something that might have been hope. If you've got a real chance to beat her, to make her eat her words in front of the whole world, then I want to help make that happen. David looked at the books in his hands. Legal German, medical French, scientific Arabic. The kind of specialized vocabulary he'd never had reason to study before. How much can I learn in 3 days? Raymond smiled grimly. Let's find out. For the next 72 hours, David barely slept. Raymond drilled him relentlessly, throwing technical terms at him in every language, testing his comprehension, correcting his pronunciation. Other inmates started gathering at their cell door during exercise hours, listening as David rattled off complex legal terminology in German medical procedures, in French chemical formulas, in Arabic. Word spread through the facility. The language guy was the real deal. On the second night, a young guard named Torres approached the cell during her rounds. Thompson. David looked up from his Arabic textbook. You've got a visitor. Lawyer says it's urgent. Michael Torres was waiting in the interview room looking even more exhausted than before. But there was something different in his eyes. Something that might have been excitement. David, I've got news. Torres's hands were shaking as he spread papers across the table. One of your accusers came to see me this morning. James Chen, the corporate manager. What about him? He recanted. Torres's voice cracked with emotion. He admitted that his company made him lie. Your translations were perfect, David. Chen said they were the best work his company had ever received. But when his boss found out Chen had hired someone without credentials, he made Chen file a fraud complaint to cover his own ass. David felt something loosen in his chest. Validation, after all these years. Chen brought documents, Torres continued. Emails from his partners in Beijing praising your work. Internal memos showing the translations were approved without changes, and his sworn statement admitting he lied under corporate pressure. That's only one accuser. What about the other two? I'm working on them. But this, Torres tapped the papers. This changes everything. If we can prove the fraud charges were fabricated, the whole case falls apart. David nodded slowly. But I still have to pass the evaluation. Harmon's not going to drop the charges just because one accuser recanted. She's got too much pride invested in seeing me fail. I know. Torres gathered the papers. That's why you have it to be perfect. Not just good. Perfect. Show them something they've never seen before. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. David, I've been a public defender for 23 years. I've had a lot of clients. Most of them were guilty. The innocent ones usually couldn't prove it. He met David's eyes. But I think you might actually be able to do this. I think you might be able to beat them. What makes you say that? Torres smiled tiredly. Because I've never seen anyone study the way you do. Like every word matters. Like your whole life depends on it. It does, David said quietly. My daughter's waiting for me. I promised her I'd come home. The night before the evaluation, David sat alone in his cell. Raymond was asleep. The facility was quiet. In a few hours he would face 11 professors who had been specifically selected to destroy him. He thought about his father. James Thompson had come to America with nothing. No money. No connections. No English. He'd worked his way up from dishwasher to janitor to house cleaner, one job at a time. He'd never complained. Never felt sorry for himself. Just kept moving forward one day at a time. And every night after working 12-hour shifts, cleaning other people's homes, he would come back to their tiny apartment and teach David everything he'd learned. Not just Vietnamese, but the fragments of other languages he'd picked up along the way. The German phrases Mrs. Schmidt taught him. The French expressions Mr. Dubois used. The Mandarin characters the Chen children wrote in their homework. Language is power, his father used to say in his broken English. They cannot take from you what you know. They cannot steal what is in your head. James Thompson had died of a heart attack at 62. 50 years of hard labor had finally broken his body. But his mind had been sharp until the very end. David still remembered the last thing his father said to him. You have gifts, son. You hear what others cannot hear. You understand what others cannot understand. Use it. Use it to be more than what they expect you to be. David closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would honor his father's memory. Tomorrow he would prove them all wrong. The courtroom was even more packed than before. David walked through the double doors and felt the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on him. News of his confrontation with Judge Harmon had spread like wildfire. Media trucks lined the street outside. Journalists from across the country had flown in to witness what everyone was calling the language trial. Michael Torres had somehow managed to get him a clean suit. Navy blue. Simple. Professional. His handcuffs had been removed, a small victory negotiated by his lawyer. David stood straight, shoulders back, meeting the eyes of everyone who looked at him. He would not shrink, not today. In the front row, 11 professors sat in a special section, each one holding folders and papers for their respective languages. David recognized some of them from news articles and academic journals. Distinguished scholars with decades of experience and dozens of published papers. They looked at him the way scientists look at lab specimens, clinical, detached, ready to dissect. All rise. Judge Victoria Harmon entered with her usual ceremony. But there was something different about her today. A barely contained excitement. The expression of someone who was about to watch a public execution and couldn't wait to see the blood. "This court is now in session," she announced. "We are here to conduct a professional evaluation of the defendant's claimed linguistic abilities." She turned to the professors with a warm smile, the first genuine warmth David had ever seen from her. "Professors, thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to assist this court. As I explained when I contacted you, the defendant claims to speak 11 languages fluently, despite having no formal education or credentials. Your job today is to determine whether these claims have any merit whatsoever." She looked at David, and her smile turned cold. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you're ready. Because this," she gestured at the assembled professors, "is the most rigorous language evaluation ever conducted in a courtroom. When it's over, there will be no more room for lies." David said nothing. He simply waited. The first professor stood. A middle-aged Asian woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "I am Professor Linda Tanaka," she announced. "I hold doctorates in both Mandarin Chinese and Japanese linguistics from Stanford. I have been testing language proficiency for over 20 years. She handed David a thick document. "This is a medical text regarding cardiovascular surgical procedures written in traditional Chinese characters. You will read it aloud, then translate it into English and explain its medical implications." David looked at the document. Dense columns of Chinese characters filled the page, describing complex surgical techniques with terminology that most native speakers would struggle to understand. Raymond had warned him about this. "They won't ask you to order coffee. They'll hit you with technical vocabulary that takes years of specialized study to master." David took a breath, and then he began to read. His voice filled the courtroom, clear, precise, with perfect Mandarin tones that made Professor Tanaka's eyes widen involuntarily. He didn't just read the text. He brought it to life, explaining each procedure, each medical term, each cultural nuance in the language that a Western doctor might miss. When he finished reading, he switched to English without pause. He translated not just the words, but the deeper meaning, adding context about how Chinese medical philosophy differed from Western approaches, how the terminology reflected centuries of traditional practice integrated with modern techniques. The courtroom was silent. Professor Tanaka sat down slowly. Her face had gone pale. She leaned over to whisper to her colleague, and David heard her words clearly. "His pronunciation is flawless. That's not possible without years of formal training." Judge Harmon's smile had faded slightly, but this was only the beginning. "Professor Mueller," she said, "you may proceed." A thick man with a blonde beard and the stern expression of someone who had spent his entire life in the rigid structure of German academia stood up. His reputation preceded him. Colleagues called him the executioner, because no student had ever passed his oral examinations on the first try. "Mr. Thompson," Mueller said, his English heavy with a Bavarian accent, "I have here a contract from the German Federal Court of Justice. It contains 17 clauses regarding international commercial arbitration. You will read it aloud, identify any legal ambiguities, and explain the implications under both German and American law." He handed David a document so dense with legal terminology, that even native German lawyers would need hours to parse it properly. David took the paper. His eyes moved across the Gothic script, absorbing the complex sentence structures that German legal writing was infamous for. He could feel the entire courtroom watching him, waiting for him to stumble, waiting for the moment when the fraud would finally be exposed. He began to read. The German flowed from his mouth like water, precise, formal, with that particular rhythm that legal German demanded. But David didn't just read. He stopped at Clause 7 and looked up. "There's a problem here," he said in German, then switched to English. "This clause contradicts Clause 12. Under German law, this ambiguity would void the entire arbitration agreement. Any competent lawyer would catch this before signing." Mueller's face went red. "That document was prepared by the German Federal Ministry of Justice." "Then someone at the ministry made a mistake." David handed the paper back. "Clause 7 grants exclusive jurisdiction to Frankfurt courts. Clause 12 allows for venue selection by the defendant. You can't have both. It's basic contract law." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Mueller sat down without another word, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Judge Harmon's fingers were tapping rapidly on her desk. The rhythm was irregular, agitated. David noticed, but said nothing. "Next," Harmon said, her voice tight. Professor Amira Hassan rose. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, draped in a silk hijab, with the bearing of someone who had grown up in the highest circles of Arab society. Her specialty was classical Arabic, the ancient formal language of the Quran, and pre-Islamic poetry. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice musical but sharp, "I will not insult you with modern Arabic. Any tourist can learn to order food in Cairo. Instead, I have prepared something more challenging." She handed him a single page of handwritten text. "This is a passage from Al-Mutanabbi, the greatest poet of the Arabic language, 10th century. His work is considered untranslatable by most scholars because the meaning exists in layers historical, spiritual, linguistic." She paused, a small smile playing on her lips. "You will read it, explain its meaning, and then you will compose an original response in the same classical style." David looked at the text. The calligraphy was beautiful, ancient, the kind of Arabic that had been written when Europe was still in the Dark Ages. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he began to speak. The Arabic that came from his mouth was not the Arabic of street vendors or news broadcasts. It was the Arabic of scholars and poets, of caliphs and philosophers. His voice took on a melodic quality, rising and falling with the internal rhythms of the verse. He recited the passage. Then he explained its meaning, not just the surface words, but the historical context, the theological implications, the way Al-Mutanabbi had used specific phonetic patterns to create emotional resonance. And then, without pause, David began to compose. His original verse flowed in the same classical style, using the same meter, the same rhyme scheme, speaking of justice and truth, and the blindness of those who judge by appearance rather than substance. When he finished, Professor Hassan was crying. "How?" she whispered, forgetting the formality of the courtroom. "How is this possible? I have students who study for decades and cannot do what you just did." "The Al-Rahman family," David said quietly in English. Dr. Al-Rahman was an imam before he became a diplomat. He believed that Arabic was not just a language, but a way of seeing the universe. He used to say that every word has a root, a history, a connection to all other words. David paused. "He taught me to hear the poetry in everything." Hassan wiped her eyes and sat down. She did not look at Judge Harmon. The prosecutor, Elena Mitchell, was no longer smiling. She was flipping through her notes, frantically searching for something, anything that might salvage her case. "Your Honor," Mitchell said, standing abruptly, "I'd like to request a brief recess." "Denied." Harmon's voice was clipped harsh. "We will proceed." David understood then. Harmon wasn't going to give anyone time to regroup, to reconsider. She had committed herself to his destruction, and she would see it through to the end, even if the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. Professor Igor Volkov was next. Russian literature. He presented David with a passage from Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, not the famous parts that every literature student knows, but an obscure philosophical dialogue buried deep in the middle of the novel. David read it in Russian, his accent shifting to match the St. Petersburg dialect of the 19th century. Then he explained the passage's place in Russian literary history, its connection to Orthodox theology, the way Dostoevsky used the character of Ivan to explore the problem of evil. The Ivanov family, David said, when asked how he knew such things. Mr. Ivanov was a literature professor posted to Melbourne before coming here. He would read Dostoevsky to me while his wife prepared borscht. I was 12. He told me that if you can't feel the Russian suffering in the words, you're not truly reading the masters. Volkov nodded slowly. He was right. French came next. Professor Jean-Pierre Dubois, no relation to the family. David had known, though the name brought back memories, tested him with wine terminology so specialized that it seemed designed for failure. Grape varieties, regional designations, the specific vocabulary used by sommeliers to describe the characteristics of a 1947 Cheval Blanc. David answered every question. He explained the difference between terroir and climate, described the proper way to decant a young Burgundy versus an aged Bordeaux, and finished by recommending a food pairing for each wine mentioned in perfect French with a slight Provençal accent. Mia Dubois was a sommelier, David explained. She let me smell the wines while she worked. She used to say that the French of wine is liquid poetry. Every word evokes the land, the sun, the time. You don't translate it. You feel it. Italian tested his knowledge of opera. David discussed the differences between Verdi and Puccini, explained the historical context of Nabucco and its connection to Italian nationalism, and then, at the professor's request, sang a few bars from Nessun Dorma, with pronunciation so perfect that several people in the gallery began to applaud before catching themselves. Portuguese challenged him with Brazilian idioms that differed sharply from European Portuguese. David navigated them easily, explaining the colonial history that had created the linguistic divergence and demonstrating fluency in both variants. Japanese pushed him through 3 different writing systems and the complex hierarchy of formal speech. David wrote kanji characters on a whiteboard, explained the difference between kigo and casual speech, and discussed the cultural implications of choosing one form over another. Korean demanded mastery of honorifics that changed based on the relative social status of speaker and listener. David demonstrated 7 different ways to say thank you and explained when each was appropriate. Each time David passed. Each time he added the human story behind his knowledge, the families who had taught him, the children he had played with, the homes where he had grown up, invisible but absorbing everything. By the 10th language, the courtroom had transformed. The mockery was gone. The whispers had shifted from skepticism to awe. Journalists were texting their editors, telling them to clear the front page, and Judge Harmon's face had turned to stone. "One more," she said, her voice barely controlled. "Professor Vaughn, you may proceed." Andrew Vaughn stood. Unlike the other professors who had shown varying degrees of respect, as David proved himself, Vaughn's expression remained contemptuous. He was a tall man with thin lips and cold eyes, the kind of academic who believed credentials were everything and lived experience was nothing. "I have saved the most difficult test for last," Vaughn announced. Hebrew. Not modern Hebrew, the kind spoken in Tel Aviv, but ancient Hebrew. The language of the Torah, the Talmud, the great religious commentaries. He pulled a document from his briefcase with theatrical slowness. "This is a philosophical treatise on the nature of justice, written in classical Hebrew. It contains theological arguments that have been debated by scholars for centuries. You will read it, translate it, and explain its relevance to contemporary ethics." He handed David the document. David looked at it and froze. The courtroom went silent. After 10 successful tests, after 10 languages, conquered, this sudden hesitation was jarring. Mitchell sat up straighter. Harmon leaned forward, hope rekindling in her eyes. "Is there a problem, Mr. Thompson?" Vaughn asked, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Perhaps this is finally beyond your abilities." David looked up slowly. His expression had changed. The calm focus was gone, replaced by something else entirely. Recognition, mixed with disbelief, mixed with a cold, burning anger. "I know this text," David said quietly. Vaughn blinked. "Excuse me." "I said I know this text." David's voice grew stronger. "I know it because I translated it 6 years ago." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ventilation system seemed to stop humming. "That's absurd," Vaughn said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "This is an ancient philosophical manuscript. You couldn't possibly, not the original manuscript." David stepped forward, still holding the document. "The translation. This exact translation. I did it 6 years ago for an online client who wanted to remain anonymous. He paid well, requested complete confidentiality. I spent 3 weeks on it, researching every word, every concept, every theological implication." He looked at Vaughn with eyes that could cut glass. "And 4 years ago, you published an academic paper titled New Interpretations of Hebrew Ethical Texts. I read that paper, Professor, because I was curious to see how scholars approach the same material I had translated." David paused, letting the words sink in. "You used my translation, word for word, without credit, without attribution, without even changing the punctuation." The courtroom exploded. Journalists leaped to their feet. The other professors turned to stare at Vaughn with expressions of horror. Michael Torres grabbed his phone and started typing frantically. "That is a lie!" Vaughn shouted, his face purple with rage. "This is a desperate attempt to— Your Honor!" David cut him off, his voice cold and clear. "My laptop is currently in police custody as evidence. On that laptop are all my work files, including the original translation of this document dated 6 years ago. Draft versions, research notes, email correspondence with the anonymous client. Everything." He looked at Harmon. "I request that the court examine those files immediately. If I'm lying, you'll know within minutes. But if I'm telling the truth—" He turned back to Vaughn. "Then one of the professors you handpicked to evaluate me is a plagiarist who built his academic reputation on stolen work." Vaughn's composure shattered completely. "You can't prove anything. You're a fraud, a con man, and this is just a desperate trick to—" "Professor Vaughn." Judge Harmon's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Her face was unreadable, but her hands were gripping the edge of her desk so hard her knuckles had turned white. "I suggest you stop talking. Immediately." She turned to the bailiff. "Bring me that laptop. Now." The next 20 minutes were the longest of David's life. A court technician retrieved the laptop from evidence storage. Under judicial supervision, Torres navigated to David's work files while the entire courtroom watched on a projection screen. The folder was there. Hebrew Translation Project 2018. Inside were dozens of files. Draft versions dated over a 3-week period. Research notes in both Hebrew and English. Email threads with a client identified only by an encrypted address. And the final document time-stamped 6 years ago, matching Vaughn's published paper word for word. "Oh my God," someone in the gallery whispered. Professor Hassan stood up, her face twisted with disgust. "Andrew, tell me this isn't true." Vaughn said nothing. His face had gone gray. Professor Muller rose as well. "You plagiarized from an uncredentialed translator. You built your career on stolen work." "I received that translation from a colleague," Vaughn stammered. "I had no way of knowing—" "That's not how academia works." Muller's German accent thickened with anger. "We verify sources. We attribute credit. This is foundational. This is basic. You have dishonored yourself and everyone associated with you." Harmon banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order, but the damage was done. The professors were arguing among themselves. The journalists were practically climbing over each other to get better shots. And David stood in the middle of it all, finally vindicated after 6 years of wondering why his work had appeared under someone else's name. "Order," Harmon shouted. "I said order." Gradually, the chaos subsided. People returned to their seats. But the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. David was no longer the defendant on trial. Vaughn was. "Professor Vaughn," Harmon said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You are excused from this proceeding. I strongly suggest you contact an attorney. The university will be notified, and this court will consider whether criminal charges for fraud are warranted." Vaughn stood frozen for a moment, as if unable to comprehend what had just happened. Then he gathered his briefcase and walked out of the courtroom without looking at anyone. The door closed behind him with a sound like a coffin lid. Harmon sat in silence for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, stripped of its arrogance, its mockery, its absolute certainty. "Mr. Thompson, the evaluation is complete. Do the remaining professors have any doubts about the defendant's linguistic capabilities?" One by one, the professors shook their heads. Professor Hassan spoke for all of them. "Your Honor, in my 20 years of assessing language proficiency, I have never witnessed anything like what I saw today. Mr. Thompson doesn't simply speak these languages. He embodies them. His knowledge goes beyond vocabulary and grammar to encompass cultural context, historical significance, and emotional resonance." She paused, looking at David with something like reverence. "He is without question one of the most remarkable linguists I have ever encountered. And he achieved this without formal education, without institutional support, without any of the advantages that most scholars take for granted. That makes his accomplishment not just impressive, but extraordinary." She took a breath. "He is a testament to what human beings can achieve when they are driven by genuine passion and love for learning." Harmon absorbed this in silence. Her face was impossible to read, a mask that had served her well through 22 years on the bench, but was now showing cracks around the edges. "Ms. Mitchell," she said finally, "does the prosecution wish to proceed with the fraud charges?" Mitchell stood slowly. She looked like someone who had watched a sure victory transform into a catastrophic defeat, and still couldn't quite believe it. "Your Honor, in light of today's developments, and considering that 2 of the 3 complaining witnesses have recanted their statements and confessed to filing false reports under corporate pressure." She took a breath. "The people request permission to withdraw all charges against the defendant." The courtroom erupted again. Cheers mixed with shocked exclamations. Torres buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed. David felt his knees go weak. "Quiet." Harmon's gavel crashed down. "I will have order in my courtroom." When silence returned, she turned to David. The mask had slipped further now. Behind it, David could see something he never expected. Shame. "Mr. Thompson," Harmon said, "this court owes you an apology." She paused. When she continued, her voice was heavy. "I owe you an apology. I looked at your background and made assumptions. I saw where you came from and decided I knew who you were. I allowed prejudice I didn't even know I possessed, to influence my judgment." She removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "You came into my courtroom asking only for a chance to prove yourself, and I mocked you. I laughed at you in front of hundreds of people. I called you a liar before hearing a single word of evidence." Harmon looked at him directly. For the first time, she seemed human. "That was wrong. It was wrong legally, ethically, and morally. You deserved better from this court. You deserved better from me." David didn't know how to respond. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times during his sleepless nights in the cell. The moment when Harmon would be forced to admit she was wrong. In his imagination, he had felt triumphant, vindicated, victorious. But now, standing here, all he felt was tired. "All charges against David Marcus Thompson are hereby dismissed," Harmon announced. Mr. Thompson, you are free to go. Your personal effects, including your laptop, will be returned to you immediately." She banged her gavel one final time. This court is adjourned. The chaos that followed was overwhelming. Journalists shouted questions, cameras flashed. Torres hugged David so hard he could barely breathe. The professors crowded around offering congratulations and business cards and invitations to speak at conferences. But David pushed through all of it, desperate to reach the exit, desperate to get outside where he could breathe, where he could think, where he could process what had just happened. He made it to the courthouse steps before his legs gave out. He sat down on the cold stone and put his head in his hands. And for the first time since his father died, David Thompson cried. He cried for the father who had sacrificed everything so his son could have a better life. He cried for the years of being invisible, overlooked, dismissed. He cried for his daughter Lily, who was waiting for him to come home. And he cried because after 38 years of being told he wasn't good enough, the world had finally seen who he really was. "Mr. Thompson." David looked up. Through tear-blurred eyes, he saw an older woman standing before him. She was elegant with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, dressed in expensive clothes that spoke of a world very different from his own. "My name is Margaret Morrison," she said softly. "I knew your father." David wiped his eyes and stared at the woman standing before him. "You knew my father." "Very well." Margaret sat down beside him on the courthouse steps, not caring that her designer suit was getting dirty. "He worked for my family for the last 5 years of his life, and there are things you need to know, things your father wanted me to tell you when you were ready." "What things?" David's voice was hoarse from crying. His mind was still reeling from the courtroom victory, and now this stranger was telling him she had secrets about his dead father. Margaret's eyes grew distant. "Your father wasn't just a cleaner, David. Oh, he pushed a mop and scrubbed floors, yes. But he was also the bravest man I ever knew." She paused. "Because while he cleaned, he listened. And he heard things. Terrible things. Things he couldn't ignore." David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "What kind of things?" Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a worn envelope. He discovered a network. People using diplomatic immunity as cover for human trafficking. Moving victims across borders hidden in plain sight within embassy staff and diplomatic families. Your father gathered evidence for years, David. Names, dates, routes. He documented everything. She pressed the envelope into his hands. "Before he died, he gave me this. He made me promise to keep it safe until you were strong enough to handle the truth. Until the world was ready to listen to you." David stared at the envelope. His hands were trembling. "My father. He died of a heart attack. That's what they told me. That's what the official report said." Margaret's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "But David, he was getting ready to go public. He had contacted journalists, investigators. He was preparing to expose everything." She looked at him with eyes full of old grief. And then suddenly his heart just stopped. No warning, no prior symptoms, just gone. The courthouse steps seemed to tilt beneath David. Everything he thought he knew about his father's death, about his own life, was shifting, rearranging into a new and terrifying pattern. "Are you saying someone killed him?" "I don't know for certain. I only know what he was doing and what happened next." Margaret stood brushing off her coat. "There's more, David. Much more. Your father left documents in a safety deposit box in Geneva. Evidence he didn't trust to anyone. Not even me. You're the only one who can open it." She handed him a business card. "Call me when you're ready. But be careful. The people your father was investigating, they're still out there. And now that you've become famous, now that the whole world knows your name and your story." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. David watched her walk away, the envelope heavy in his hands. He thought about his father pushing a mop through empty hallways, listening to conversations in a dozen languages, quietly gathering evidence of crimes no one else even knew existed. His father had given him the gift of languages. But that gift, David now realized, had never been just about communication. It had been preparation. For this moment. For this fight. For the truth that was waiting to be told. David opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper covered in his father's handwriting. Vietnamese words written in a hand that shook slightly, the hand of a man who knew he was running out of time. "My son," the letter began, "if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have finally shown the world who you are. I am proud of you. I was always proud of you. Now you must be strong, because what I am about to tell you will change everything." David read the letter once, then he read it again, and when he finished, he understood that his father's battle was now his own. The courtroom victory had been just the beginning. The real fight was only starting. That night, David sat alone in his small apartment. Torres had offered to stay with him, but David needed to be alone. He needed to think. He needed to process everything that had happened. The envelope from Margaret Morrison lay on the kitchen table. Next to it was his laptop, finally returned by the police. The same laptop that had exposed Professor Vaughn's plagiarism. The same laptop that held his father's secrets. David opened it and stared at the screen. The Hebrew translation files were still there. The ones that had destroyed Vaughn's career in a matter of minutes. But next to them were other folders. Folders labeled with his father's name. Folders David had never really examined before. He'd always assumed they were just old family photos, documents from Vietnam, sentimental things his father had scanned before he died. He opened the first folder. It contained scanned copies of documents in Russian, official-looking papers with government stamps and signatures. David's Russian was good enough to read them, and what he read made his blood run cold. Transit authorizations, movement orders, lists of names with ages attached. Most of them teenagers, some as young as 12. The documents described them as domestic staff being transferred between diplomatic households, but David knew what they really were. The second folder contained photographs, grainy, badly lit images that looked like they had been taken secretly through windows from across rooms at awkward angles. They showed men in suits exchanging envelopes, women being led through back doors of embassies, children with empty eyes standing in lines. The third folder contained audio files. David plugged in his headphones and pressed play. His father's voice filled his ears. "This is James Thompson. The date is March 15th, 2020. I am recording this in case something happens to me." David's throat tightened. He hadn't heard his father's voice in 2 years. It was exactly as he remembered, quiet, accented, filled with a dignity that no amount of poverty or discrimination had ever been able to break. "For 5 years, I have been collecting evidence of a human trafficking network operating within diplomatic circles. The network uses diplomatic immunity to move victims across borders without inspection. The victims are primarily young women and children from Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and Central America. They are brought into the country as domestic staff, and then..." His father's voice cracked. "Then they disappear. Into private homes, into businesses, into places where no one will ever look for them." David listened to the entire recording. 45 minutes of his father's quiet voice describing atrocities that made David want to scream. Names of diplomats, names of corporations, names of government officials who looked the other way in exchange for bribes. And then at the end, "If you are listening to this, David, it means I am gone. I am sorry I never told you. I wanted to protect you. I wanted you to have a normal life away from all of this ugliness. But you are my son. You have my eyes, my stubbornness, and my gift for languages. You can hear what others cannot hear. You can understand what others cannot understand. If anyone can finish what I started, it is you." A pause. A shaky breath. "I am proud of you, my son. I was always proud of you. Whatever you decide to do with this information, know that I love you. And know that your mother loved you too, even though she never got to see the man you have become." The recording ended. David sat in the darkness for a long time, tears streaming down his face. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered. "Hello, Mr. Thompson. We need to talk." The voice was calm, professional, and completely unfamiliar. "Who is this?" "My name is Samuel Cross. I'm a federal agent, and I know what your father was working on." David's grip tightened on the phone. "How did you get this number?" "That's not important right now. What's important is that your life is in danger. The people your father was investigating, they know who you are. They've been watching your case. And now that you're famous, now that the whole world knows your story, they're worried." "Worried about what?" "That you'll do what your father couldn't. That you'll expose them." David glanced toward Lily's empty bedroom. His daughter was still with Mrs. Patterson, the retired teacher who had been watching her since his arrest. "What do you want?" "To help you. Your father contacted my agency 6 months before he died. He was working with us to build a case against the network. Then he had his heart attack and everything stopped. We've been waiting for someone to pick up where he left off." "And you think that someone is me?" "I think you're the only person alive who has access to his evidence, and I think you're angry enough and smart enough to use it." David was silent for a moment. His father's warning echoed in his mind. "Do not trust anyone." "How do I know you're really a federal agent?" "You don't. Not yet. But I can prove it. Meet me tomorrow. Noon. The coffee shop on the corner of 5th and Main. I'll bring credentials, documents, whatever you need to see. And I'll tell you everything I know about your father's investigation." "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm the one who tipped off James Chen. I'm the reason he came forward and recanted his accusation. I've been protecting you from the shadows since your arrest, Mr. Thompson. It's time we started working together in the open." The line went dead. David stared at the phone in his hand. His mind was racing, trying to process everything. The letter from his father. The files on his laptop. This mysterious federal agent claiming to be an ally. He should call Torres. He should call the police. He should do something sensible, something safe, something that would protect Lily. But he thought about his father. 50 years of pushing a mop, keeping his head down, staying invisible. And the moment he tried to do something meaningful, something that mattered, he was silenced. His heart just stopped. No warning, no explanation. David had spent his whole life being invisible too. Overlooked. Underestimated. He had played by the rules, kept his head down, tried to build a quiet life for himself and his daughter. And where had it gotten him? Handcuffed in a courtroom. Mocked by a judge who had already decided he was guilty before hearing a single word. No more. His father had given him a gift. Not just the languages, but the ability to hear what others couldn't hear. To understand what others couldn't understand. And now his father had given him something else. A mission. The people who had destroyed his father's life, who had silenced him before he could expose the truth, they were still out there. Still operating. Still trafficking human beings across borders like cargo. David looked at the closed door of Lily's bedroom. He thought about all the children in those photographs. Children who were probably around Lily's age. Children who had been taken from their families and sold into darkness. He couldn't save his father. He couldn't undo the past. But maybe he could finish what James Thompson had started. He picked up his phone and dialed Margaret Morrison's number. She answered on the second ring. "David, I was hoping you'd call. The safety deposit box in Geneva. What's in it?" "Everything your father couldn't trust to his laptop. Original documents. Physical evidence. Testimony from victims he helped escape over the years. It's all there waiting for you." "How do I get to it?" "You'll need to go to Geneva personally. The box is keyed to your fingerprints and a passphrase your father set up. No one else can open it." "What's the passphrase?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "He never told me. He said you would know. That it would be something only you would understand." David closed his eyes. He thought about all the nights he and his father had spent together talking about languages, about life, about the world. What would his father have chosen? What phrase would be meaningful enough to protect his life's work? And then it came to him. "Language is power," David said softly. "They cannot take from you what you know." Margaret's breath caught. It isn't it? That's what he used to say. Every night. Every single night. Then you have everything you need. Margaret paused. "David, I need to warn you. The third accuser, Richard Blake. He's not just a businessman. He's connected to the network your father was investigating. His security company provides services to the diplomatic families involved. He was placed in your case specifically to discredit you, to make sure no one would believe you if you ever discovered the truth." I figured as much. If you go to Geneva, if you retrieve that evidence, they'll come for you. They have resources, connections, people in places you wouldn't expect. Your father tried to fight them alone and... She didn't finish the sentence. "I'm not my father," David said. "I'm not going to do this alone." "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm done being invisible. The whole world just watched me prove 11 professors wrong in front of a judge who tried to destroy me. I've got journalists calling me TV stations, wanting interviews, publishers offering book deals. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it in the open. I'm going to make so much noise that they can't silence me without the whole world noticing." Margaret was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "Your father would be so proud of you." "I hope so." David looked at the files on his laptop, the evidence of crimes that had been hidden for decades. "Because I'm about to start a war." The next morning, David met Samuel Cross at the coffee shop. The agent was younger than David expected, mid-30s with sharp eyes and the kind of alertness that suggested he was always watching, always calculating. Cross showed his credentials. Federal Bureau of Investigation, specialized in human trafficking cases. "Your father was one of our best informants," Cross said, keeping his voice low. "He had access to places we couldn't reach, diplomatic functions, private residences, embassy events. He gathered more intelligence in 5 years than our entire division had collected in a decade." "Then why didn't you protect him?" Cross's jaw tightened. "We tried. We had a plan to bring him in, put him in witness protection, extract him before they could move against him. But someone leaked our timeline. By the time we got to his apartment, he was already gone." "Gone?" David's voice hardened. "You mean dead?" "His body was never found, David." The words hit like a physical blow. "What?" "The official report says heart attack, but there was no body at the hospital, no medical records, no death certificate on file with the state. Someone cleaned up after themselves very thoroughly." David felt the world tilt sideways. "Are you saying my father might be alive?" "I'm saying we don't know what happened to him. What we do know is that the network has people inside law enforcement, inside government, inside the intelligence community. They've been operating for decades with virtual impunity. Your father was the first person to seriously threaten them, and they responded accordingly. Then why hasn't your agency taken them down? Because every time we get close, our cases fall apart. Witnesses disappear. Evidence gets lost. Prosecutors suddenly decide not to pursue charges." Cross leaned forward. "But you have something we don't. You have your father's complete files, and you have something else that might be even more valuable." "What's that?" "Public attention. You're famous now, David. The language man who beat the system. The single father who proved a corrupt judge wrong. People are paying attention to you. If you come forward with your father's evidence, if you tell his story to the world, they won't be able to silence you the way they silenced him." David considered this. "What do you need from me?" "Go to Geneva, retrieve your father's evidence, and then let us help you bring these people down. Legally, publicly, permanently. And Lily, my daughter. We can protect her, safe house, round-the-clock security, new identity if necessary, whatever it takes." David thought about his daughter's face when he came home. The way she had clung to him, terrified of losing him again. He had promised her he would never go away. But he also thought about the children in those photographs, the ones with empty eyes standing in lines waiting to be sold. "I'll go to Geneva," David said, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, Lily stays with people I trust, not a government safe house. My people. Second, I get to choose when and how the evidence goes public. Third, if anything happens to me, if I disappear the way my father did, you make sure the world finds out. You make sure they can't cover it up again." Cross nodded slowly. "Agreed. All of it." They shook hands across the table. "One more thing," David said. "Richard Blake. I want him. He's protected, connected. Taking him down won't be easy." "I don't care about easy." David's eyes were cold. "He helped destroy my life. He helped silence my father. When this is over, I want him to pay." Cross studied him for a long moment, then smiled grimly. "You really are your father's son." That afternoon, David made arrangements. Lily would stay with Mrs. Patterson and her husband, who agreed to take her in without hesitation. "That child needs stability," Mrs. Patterson said, "and she needs to know her father is coming back." "I will come back," David promised, "no matter what." Derek, his former cellmate who had been released on parole, volunteered to keep watch on the apartment. "You gave me hope in there," Derek said when David called him. "Let me return the favor." "I might be putting you in danger." "Brother, I've been in danger my whole life. At least this time, it's for a good cause." The flight to Geneva left the next morning. David spent his last night at home, holding Lily, reading her favorite books, singing her to sleep the way he had when she was a baby. "Why do you have to go, Daddy?" she asked, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Because there are people who need help, sweetheart. People who don't have anyone to speak for them." "Like you didn't have anyone to speak for you." "Yes, baby, exactly like that." "And you're going to help them like Mr. Torres helped you." "I'm going to try." Lily nodded seriously with the gravity that only children can muster. "Okay, Daddy, but you have to promise to come back." "I promise." "Cross your heart." David crossed his heart. "Cross my heart." She fell asleep with her hand clutching his shirt. David held her until dawn, memorizing the weight of her in his arms. The sound of her breathing. The smell of strawberry shampoo in her hair. Whatever happened in Geneva, whatever he found in that safety deposit box, he would come back to her. He had promised. And David Thompson never broke a promise. The flight to Geneva was 11 hours of turbulence and sleepless thinking. David sat in economy class, wedged between a businessman who snored and a teenager who played video games with the volume too loud. He didn't mind. The noise gave him something to focus on, besides the fear gnawing at his stomach. Agent Cross had wanted to send a team with him. David refused. "If I show up with federal agents, they'll know something's wrong. I need to do this quietly." "Quietly gets people killed," Cross had warned. "So does making noise at the wrong time." They had compromised. Cross would have local contacts watching the bank from a distance. If David didn't check in every 4 hours, they would move in. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. The plane landed at Geneva International just after dawn. David cleared customs with nothing but a carry-on bag and a heart full of questions. The passport control officer barely glanced at him. Just another American tourist. Unremarkable in every way. That was the point. Invisible. The way his father had taught him to be. David stepped outside and felt his phone buzz. A text from an unknown number. "You're being followed. Gray jacket, black cap. 20 meters behind you. Don't look." His blood went cold. He kept walking, forcing himself not to turn around. Another text. "Cross's team. Just making sure you get there safe. Proceed normally." David exhaled slowly. The International Helvetica Bank was located in the Old Town in a building that looked like it had been standing since before America was a country. Stone walls, iron gates, the kind of architecture that whispered of old money and older secrets. David approached the entrance. His phone buzzed again. "We have eyes on 2 suspicious vehicles, black sedans, parked on the north side. They arrived 30 minutes before you did. Be careful." David pushed through the heavy wooden doors. A young woman in an immaculate suit approached him immediately. "Good morning, sir. How may I assist you?" "I have a safety deposit box," David said, "under the name James Thompson." The woman's professional smile didn't waver. "Of course, sir. Please follow me." She led him through a series of corridors, each one requiring a different security clearance. Finally, they reached a small private room with a single table and 2 chairs. "The box is number 4721, the woman said. "You will need to provide biometric verification and a verbal passphrase. Are you prepared?" David nodded. She placed a small device on the table. "Please press your thumb to the scanner." He did. A green light flashed. "Biometric confirmed. Now please state your passphrase." David took a breath. He thought of his father's voice, the accent that never quite faded, no matter how many years he spent in America. The words he said every night, a mantra, a prayer, a promise. Language is power. They cannot take from you what you know. The woman typed something into her tablet, waited, then smiled. "Verification complete, Mr. Thompson. Please wait here. The box will be brought to you shortly." She left, and David was alone with his thoughts. He checked his phone. No new messages from Cross's team. No alerts. Just the quiet hum of climate-controlled air and the distant sound of footsteps somewhere in the building. 10 minutes later, the door opened, but it wasn't a bank employee. A man walked in. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who was used to being feared. "Mr. Thompson," the man said, "I was hoping we could have a conversation." David's heart began to pound. "Who are you?" "My name is Victor Drake. I represent certain interests who are very concerned about the contents of that box." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please." Drake smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "Let's not insult each other's intelligence. Your father was a thorn in our side for 30 years. We thought the problem was solved when he retired. But apparently, he left behind a legacy." David calculated the distance to the door. Too far. Drake was blocking the exit. "What do you want?" "A simple exchange. You give me the box, and you walk away. Go back to America. Raise your daughter. Live a quiet life. No one needs to get hurt." "And if I refuse?" Drake's smile disappeared. "Then things become complicated. Your daughter Lily, isn't it? She's staying with a retired school teacher, Mrs. Patterson. Nice house on Maple Street. Quiet neighborhood. The kind of place where screams might go unnoticed." The fear in David's chest transformed into something else. Something harder. Something colder. "You're threatening my daughter." "I'm offering you a choice. The box or your family. It's very simple." David looked at the man who represented everything his father had fought against. The arrogance. The cruelty. The absolute certainty that money and power made them untouchable. "My father spent 30 years fighting people like you," David said quietly. "He saved hundreds of lives. He documented every crime, every victim, every name. And you thought you could make all of that disappear by making him disappear. Your father was a fool. A noble fool, perhaps, but a fool nonetheless. He thought he could change the world by collecting papers and recording conversations. But the world doesn't change, Mr. Thompson. It just keeps turning. And the powerful stay powerful, and the weak stay weak." "Then why are you here?" Drake paused. "Why come yourself?" David pressed. "Why not send someone else? If you're so confident that this doesn't matter, why bother threatening a nobody like me?" For the first time, something flickered in Drake's eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or fear. "Because you're not a nobody anymore, are you?" David continued. "The whole world watched me prove 11 professors wrong. The whole world saw a judge forced to apologize. I'm famous now. If something happens to me, if I disappear the way my father did, people will ask questions. Journalists will dig. The story won't just die." He took a step forward. "That's why you're scared. Not of me, but of what I represent. For 30 years you operated in the shadows. You used money and connections and violence to stay hidden. But my father understood something you didn't." David's voice hardened. "The truth doesn't need power. It just needs a voice." Drake's hand moved toward his jacket. "I wouldn't do that," David said calmly. "There are federal agents outside this building. Swiss police have been notified. And I've already sent copies of everything in this box to 3 different news organizations set to release automatically if I don't check in within the hour." It was a bluff. David had done nothing of the sort, but Drake didn't know that. "You're lying." "Maybe. Are you willing to bet your freedom on it?" The two men stared at each other. Seconds stretched into eternity. And then Drake smiled again. But this time it was different. Colder, more dangerous. "You're more like your father than I expected. He was a stubborn bastard too." He stepped aside, clearing the path to the door. "Go ahead, Mr. Thompson. Take your box. Tell your story. But remember this, we've been operating for 100 years. We've survived governments, wars, revolutions. We'll survive you too." David didn't move. "I'm not leaving without the box. It's being brought to you as we speak. I just wanted to have this conversation first, face to face, man to man." Drake straightened his tie. "Consider it a professional courtesy. One last chance to walk away before things get unpleasant." "I don't want your courtesy. I want justice." "Justice." Drake laughed. "There's no such thing. There's only power. And the illusion of morality that the powerful create to keep the weak in line." The door opened again. 2 men in suits carried in a metal box roughly the size of a small suitcase. They placed it on the table, nodded at David, and left without a word. Drake moved toward the door. "One more thing," David said without turning around. Drake paused. "Richard Blake, the man you planted in my case. I want him." "Blake is a contractor. He does what he's paid to do." "Then tell him to start running, because when this is over, I'm coming for everyone involved." Everyone. Drake stood in the doorway for a long moment. "You know, Mr. Thompson, your father said almost the exact same thing to me. 6 months before he died." David's blood went cold. "You met my father." "Several times. He was a remarkable man, stubborn, principled, completely unwilling to see reason." Drake's voice was almost nostalgic. "I offered him the same deal I just offered you. Money, safety, a quiet life for his family. He turned me down. And then you killed him." "I didn't kill anyone. I simply removed an obstacle." "There's a difference." "Not to me, there isn't." Drake smiled one last time. "Goodbye, Mr. Thompson. I have a feeling we'll meet again, though I suspect the circumstances will be far less pleasant." He walked out of the room. The door closed behind him with a soft click. David stood alone, his heart pounding, his hands shaking. He had just looked into the eyes of the man who had murdered his father. And he had let him walk away. But not forever. David made a silent promise to himself. Not forever. He turned to the box. His father's life work. His father's secrets. Whatever was inside had been important enough to die for. David lifted the lid. The first thing he saw was a photograph. His father. Younger than David had ever known him. Standing in front of an embassy building. Beside him was a woman David didn't recognize. Beautiful, with kind eyes, and a smile that looked like it had secrets. On the back of the photo, handwritten, Hanoi, 1985. The day I decided to fight. David set the photo aside and looked at what lay beneath. Folders. Dozens of them. Each one labeled in his father's careful handwriting. Names of diplomats organized by country. Dates spanning 3 decades. And in each folder, documents, photographs, and something David hadn't expected. Cassette tapes. He picked up the first tape. The label read, Maria, age 14, Colombia. Testimony recorded March 2010. His hands trembled as he opened another folder. This one contained a stack of handwritten letters, all in Spanish. He read the first one, translating as he went. Dear Mr. James, I don't know how to thank you for what you did. Because of you, my daughter is home. She is safe. She is learning to smile again. The men who took her are still free, still hurting other children. But at least my Maria is alive. You are a saint. You are an angel. God bless you forever. There were hundreds of letters, in Spanish, in Russian, in Mandarin, in Arabic, in languages David recognized, and some he didn't. All of them thanking his father. All of them describing children who had been rescued, families who had been reunited, lives that had been saved. David had known his father was gathering evidence against traffickers. He hadn't known his father was also saving people, one by one, quietly, invisibly, over the course of 30 years. "Oh, Dad," David whispered. "You never told me any of this." At the bottom of the box was a thick manila envelope with David's name on it. He opened it and found a letter, written in Vietnamese, his father's native tongue, the language they had spoken together when they were alone. "My son," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then you have proven yourself to the world. You have shown them what you can do. And now you know the truth about who I was and what I did. I was not always a cleaner. In Vietnam, before the war ended, I was a teacher. I taught languages to young people who dreamed of a better life. When Saigon fell, I lost everything. My school, my students, my country. I came to America with nothing but my languages and my shame. For years I pushed a mop and kept my head down. I told myself I was just surviving. But then I started working for the diplomatic families. And I started hearing things, terrible things. And I realized that the same evil that destroyed my country was alive and well in my new home. I could not save Vietnam. I could not save my students. But I could save the children I heard about in whispered conversations, the ones being moved like cargo from country to country. So I started listening. I started documenting. And when I could, I started helping. The woman in the photograph is Lynn. She was my contact inside the network, a survivor who had escaped and dedicated her life to helping others do the same. She died in 2017, killed by the same people we were fighting. Her death almost broke me, but I kept going, because stopping would have meant her sacrifice was for nothing. David, I never wanted this life for you. I wanted you to have peace, stability, a normal existence. But you are my son, and you inherited my stubbornness along with my gift for languages. If you have come this far, I know you will not turn back. In this box, you will find everything. 30 years of evidence, testimony, documentation. It is enough to destroy the network, to put dozens of people in prison, to save hundreds of lives. But it is also dangerous. The moment you make this public, you will become a target. So be careful, my son. Be smart. And whatever happens, never forget why we fight. Not for revenge, not for glory, but for the children who have no voice, the families who have no power, the invisible people who suffer in silence while the world looks away. You are my greatest achievement, David. Not because of your languages, but because of your heart. I am proud of you. I was always proud of you. Your father, James. David read the letter 3 times. Each time the words hit harder. His father had been a hero, a quiet, invisible hero who had saved lives while the world thought he was just pushing a mop. He gathered everything, the folders, the tapes, the letters, the photographs, and placed them carefully back in the box. This evidence was worth more than money. It was worth lives, and he would make sure it reached the right hands. David pulled out his phone and called Cross. "I have everything," he said. "Get me out of here." "We're already on our way. Drake left the building 5 minutes ago. He's being followed." "He admitted it. He admitted he killed my father." Cross was silent for a moment. "Did you record it?" David closed his eyes. He hadn't. He had been so focused on surviving the confrontation that he hadn't thought to record anything. "No. It doesn't matter. We have enough evidence in that box to bury him 10 times over. Just get to the extraction point. We'll handle the rest." David picked up the box and walked toward the door. But he stopped when he saw the photograph again. His father, young and hopeful, standing next to a woman named Lynn, who had died fighting the same fight. "I'm going to finish this, Dad," David whispered. "I promise." He walked out of the room, down the corridors, through the lobby, and into the gray Geneva morning. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. But he was alive, and he had the evidence. Cross's team was waiting in a black van parked across the street. David climbed in, and the van pulled away before the door was even closed. "Jesus Christ," Cross said, staring at him. "What happened in there?" "We lost audio for 15 minutes. Drake found me. He was waiting inside." Cross's face went pale. "Drake was in there in person. You know him. He's a ghost. We've been trying to identify the network's leadership for years. Drake is the closest thing to a name we've ever had." Cross looked at the box in David's hands. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I was going to destroy everything he'd built, and he just let you walk out. He didn't have a choice." David opened the box and pulled out a folder at random. "My father gave me everything, Cross. 30 years of evidence. Names, dates, testimonies, documents. This is enough to bring down the whole network." Cross took the folder. His hands were trembling. He flipped through the pages, his eyes widening with each one. My God, this is everything. We've been looking for this kind of evidence for decades. Then let's use it." The flight back to America was different. David sat in first-class Cross's doing, surrounded by federal agents who pretended to be businessmen and tourists. The box was secured in a special compartment guarded at all times. David spent the flight listening to the cassette tapes on a portable player Cross had provided. One by one, he heard the voices of the people his father had saved. Maria from Colombia. 14 when she was taken. 15 when she was rescued. Yuki from Japan. Sold by her own family. Freed by a stranger who spoke her language. Ahmed from Syria. Escaped a smuggling operation with his little sister because a quiet Vietnamese man had told them exactly where to run. Each story was different. Each story was the same. Children who had been treated as commodities, as objects, as less than human. And in each story, his father appeared not as a hero, but as a helper. A voice in the darkness, speaking their language, telling them they weren't alone. When David finished the last tape, he sat in silence for a long time. His father had never sought recognition. He had never asked for thanks or praise. He had simply done what needed to be done, one life at a time, for 30 years. And now it was David's turn. They landed in New York just after midnight. Cross had arranged a secure location, a safe house in a quiet neighborhood where David could plan his next move. But first, he had a phone call to make. "Daddy." Lily's voice was sleepy but happy. "Daddy, you called. Mrs. Patterson said you might call." "Hey, baby. I missed you so much." "I missed you too. Did you find what you were looking for?" David looked at the box of evidence sitting on the table. His father's life work, the voices of hundreds of victims, the proof of crimes that had been hidden for generations. "Yes, sweetheart, I found it." "Is it something good?" "It's something important. Something that's going to help a lot of people. Like how you help me when I'm scared." David's throat tightened. Yeah, baby. Exactly like that. Then I'm proud of you, Daddy. Grandpa would be proud too. David closed his eyes, feeling the tears he had been holding back for days finally beginning to fall. I hope so, Lily. I really hope so. After they hung up, David sat alone in the safe house, surrounded by 30 years of evidence and the weight of what came next. He thought about his father's letter, the words that had guided James Thompson through decades of invisible heroism. Not for revenge, not for glory, but for the children who have no voice, the families who have no power, the invisible people who suffer in silence. David understood now. This had never been about proving himself to the world. It had never been about defeating Judge Harmon or exposing Professor Vaughn or bringing down the network. It was about giving voice to the voiceless. Tomorrow he would begin the work. He would contact journalists, arrange press conferences, coordinate with federal agencies. He would translate every testimony, tell every story, make sure the world heard what his father had spent his life documenting. But tonight, he would rest. He would remember his father. He would think about the children in those tapes, the ones who had been saved, and the ones who were still waiting to be found. And he would prepare himself for the battle to come. Because Victor Drake had been right about one thing. The network had survived for 100 years. They had money, power, connections in every corner of the world. But they had never faced someone like David Thompson. A man who spoke 11 languages. A man who had been underestimated his entire life. A man who had learned from the best, a quiet hero who pushed a mop and changed the world. The invisible man was about to become very, very visible. And the world would never be the same. The press conference was scheduled for 9 in the morning. By 7, the room was already packed. David stood backstage watching through a crack in the curtain as journalists from every major network jostled for position. CNN, Fox, BBC, Al Jazeera, Reuters. They were all there. Cameras ready, notepads out, waiting for the story that would dominate headlines for months. You ready for this? Cross asked, adjusting his tie nervously. No, David admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. That's usually how courage works. Michael Torres appeared at David's side, clutching a folder full of legal documents. Okay, here's the situation. We've coordinated with the FBI, Interpol, and 6 different national law enforcement agencies. The moment you start talking, simultaneous raids will begin in 12 countries. We're looking at over 40 arrests in the first wave alone. And Blake, being picked up as we speak. He tried to flee to the Cayman Islands last night. Coast Guard intercepted his boat 3 miles offshore. Torres smiled grimly. He's going to spend a very long time in a very small cell. David nodded. It wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough for the lives that had been destroyed. But it was a start. There's something else, Cross said quietly. We got word this morning. Victor Drake was found dead in his Geneva hotel room. Apparent suicide. David felt nothing. No satisfaction. No relief. No sense of justice served. Just emptiness. He took the coward's way out. He knew what was coming. The evidence your father gathered, it implicates Drake in over 200 cases of trafficking spanning 3 decades. He would have spent the rest of his life in prison. Cross paused. Some people can't face accountability. The stage manager appeared. Mr. Thompson, we're ready for you. David took a deep breath. He thought about his father pushing a mop through empty hallways, listening to conversations in a dozen languages, quietly saving lives while the world ignored him. He thought about Lily waiting at home with Mrs. Patterson, watching the TV with wide eyes. He thought about all the children in those cassette tapes, the ones who had been saved and the ones who hadn't. Let's do this. He walked onto the stage. The room exploded with camera flashes and shouted questions. David waited until the noise died down, then leaned into the microphone. My name is David Thompson. 3 weeks ago, I was arrested for fraud. A judge laughed at me in open court when I said I spoke 11 languages. She called me a liar, a con man, a desperate nobody from the projects who was trying to cheat the system. He paused, letting the words settle. She was wrong. And today, I'm going to tell you a story that proves just how wrong she was. For the next 2 hours, David spoke. He told them about his father, the refugee who became a cleaner, the cleaner who became a spy, the spy who became a hero. He played recordings from the cassette tapes translating the testimonies of victims in real time, giving voice to children who had been silenced for decades. He showed them photographs, documents, evidence of crimes that implicated diplomats, businessmen, and government officials on 3 continents. And when he was finished, he looked directly into the cameras and said, "My father spent 30 years fighting this battle alone. He died or disappeared before he could see it through. But he left me everything I needed to finish what he started. Today, with the help of the FBI, Interpol, and law enforcement agencies around the world, we are taking down a network that has trafficked thousands of human beings across international borders." He paused. "This is not the end. This is just the beginning." The questions came like a flood. David answered every one, speaking in whatever language the journalist preferred. Mandarin for the Chinese reporters, Arabic for Al Jazeera, French for the European press. Each time he switched languages, he saw the amazement on their faces. And he thought about Judge Harmon laughing at him in that courtroom. Who's laughing now? The aftermath was overwhelming. Within 48 hours, David's face was on every news channel in the world. The story of the cleaner's son, who exposed an international trafficking ring, became front-page news from New York to Tokyo. Hashtags trended globally. Hashtag Voice of the Voiceless. Hashtag Justice for the Invisible. Hashtag Thompson Hero. The arrests came in waves. 43 in the first week. Then another 67. Then more. Diplomats were stripped of their immunity. Businessmen were dragged from their mansions in handcuffs. Politicians resigned in disgrace. The network that had operated in shadows for a century was being dragged into the light. One name at a time. Richard Blake was among the first to be tried. David attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row, watching as the man who had tried to destroy his life was systematically destroyed by the evidence. On the day of sentencing, Blake turned and looked at David. "You think you've won," he spat. "You think this changes anything. There will always be people like me. There will always be a market. You can't stop human nature." David stood and walked to the barrier separating them. "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but I can make sure people like you spend the rest of their lives in cages, and I can make sure the world never forgets what you did." Blake was sentenced to 47 years without possibility of parole. As the guards led him away, David felt something he hadn't expected. Not triumph, but peace. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And justice had been served. 3 months after the press conference, David received a phone call. "Mr. Thompson, this is Ambassador Klaus Zimmermann from the United Nations. I wonder if we might meet." They met in New York in a conference room overlooking the East River. Zimmermann was a tall German man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Your work has been extraordinary," Zimmermann said. "The evidence your father gathered, the testimonies you translated, the attention you've brought to this issue, it has accomplished more in 3 months than our anti-trafficking initiatives have achieved in a decade." "I had good material to work with," David replied. "My father did the hard work. I just told the story." "You're too modest. What you did required courage, intelligence, and something else. Empathy. You didn't just translate those testimonies. You felt them. You made the world feel them." Zimmermann leaned forward. "That's why I'm here. The United Nations is creating a new position, Special Translator for Human Rights. Your job would be to give voice to people the world needs to hear. Victims, witnesses, survivors, people whose stories are trapped behind language barriers." David was silent for a moment. "That's a big job." "It is, but I believe you're the only person who can do it. I have a daughter. She's 8 years old. I can't be traveling the world all the time. We would accommodate that. Flexible schedule, remote work when possible, full support for your family. Zimmerman smiled. Mr. Thompson, your father spent 30 years fighting this battle in the shadows. You have a chance to continue his work in the light, to make sure that what he sacrificed wasn't in vain. David thought about Lily. He thought about the promise he had made to her to always come home. But he also thought about the children in those tapes, the ones who were still out there, waiting to be found. I'll do it, he said, on one condition. Name it. I want to create a program to identify and train people like me. People with language gifts who never got the credentials to prove it. People the system overlooked and underestimated. They're out there, Ambassador. Thousands of them, maybe millions. And they could be doing this work too if someone gave them a chance. Zimmerman nodded slowly. That's an excellent idea. Consider it done. They shook hands, and David felt something shift inside him. This was what he was meant to do. Not just speak languages, but use them. Not just translate words, but translate pain into justice. Silence into truth. His father had planted the seeds. Now David would grow the garden. 6 months later, David stood in the same courtroom where he had once been humiliated. But this time, he wasn't a defendant. He was a keynote speaker at an international conference on linguistic justice hosted by the very institution that had tried to destroy him. The room was packed with judges, lawyers, professors, and journalists from around the world. And in the back row, almost hidden behind a pillar, sat Victoria Harmon. She had retired from the bench 3 months after David's acquittal. The publicity surrounding the case had triggered investigations into her other rulings, revealing a pattern of bias and misconduct that ended her career in disgrace. She had lost her pension, her reputation, everything she had spent decades building. David saw her as he took the stage. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Harmon looked away first. "Good morning," David began. "I want to tell you a story about invisibility." He spoke for an hour. About his father. About the children who had been saved. About the network that had been dismantled. He spoke about language as a tool of power and language as a bridge between worlds. He spoke about the importance of listening to voices that had been silenced, of seeing people who had been overlooked. And then near the end, he said something that made the entire room go still. 6 months ago, I stood in this building in handcuffs. A judge laughed at me because I claimed to speak 11 languages. She called me a liar without hearing a single word of evidence. She assumed she knew everything about me based on where I came from and what my father did for a living. He paused. That judge was wrong, but I don't hate her for it, because she taught me something valuable. She taught me what it feels like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to have your truth rejected before you even have a chance to speak it. David looked directly at Harmon. I know you're here, Judge. I know you've been watching my story unfold, and I want you to know something. The room went completely silent. I forgive you. A gasp rippled through the audience. I forgive you because holding on to anger would only poison me. I forgive you because my father taught me that vengeance is a trap that destroys the person who seeks it. And I forgive you because I truly hope, that what happened to you will make you a better person, that you'll use your experience to help others avoid the mistakes you made. Harmon's face crumpled. She put her hand over her mouth, trying to hold back tears. That's what justice really is, David continued. Not punishment, not revenge, but transformation. The chance to become better than we were. The chance to see what we couldn't see before. After the speech, Harmon approached him. She looked smaller than he remembered, diminished in a way that went beyond physical size. Mr. Thompson? David? I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything. No, I need to. I need you to know that I've spent every day since your trial thinking about what I did. The arrogance, the cruelty, the absolute certainty that I knew who you were. She wiped her eyes. I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, truly sorry. David looked at her for a long moment. He saw the broken woman before him, stripped of her power, her prestige, her certainty. He could have walked away. He could have let her suffer in silence, but that wasn't who his father had raised him to be. "Judge Harmon," he said quietly, "my foundation is starting a program to train legal professionals in recognizing and overcoming bias. We need advisors, people who understand how the system fails and how to fix it. Would you be interested?" Harmon stared at him in disbelief. "You're offering me a job after everything I did to you?" "I'm offering you a chance to do better. That's all any of us can ask for." She started to cry openly then, not caring who saw. "Thank you. Thank you. I don't deserve this." "No." David agreed. "You don't. But deserving isn't the point. Doing better is the point." 1 year after the press conference, David stood in front of a small cemetery on the outskirts of the city. He had finally been able to give his father a proper burial. The FBI had located James Thompson's remains in an unmarked grave outside Geneva. Confirmation that he had been killed, not died of natural causes. The men responsible were now in prison, and James Thompson could finally rest. Lily held David's hand as they stood before the headstone. The inscription read, "James Thompson, 1955 to 2022. Teacher, father, hero. He gave voice to the voiceless." "Daddy," Lily whispered, "why are you crying?" "Because I miss him, sweetheart. Because I wish he could see all of this." "Maybe he can." Lily squeezed his hand. "Mrs. Patterson says people who die become angels. And angels can see everything." David smiled through his tears. "Maybe she's right." "Daddy?" "Yes, baby. Can I say something to Grandpa?" "Of course." Lily stepped forward and placed a small bouquet of flowers on the grave. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke in a clear, strong voice. "Hi, Grandpa. I never met you, but Daddy tells me stories about you all the time. He says you were very brave and very kind, and you helped a lot of people." She paused. "I want to be like you when I grow up. I'm learning Vietnamese from Daddy. He says you would have liked that." She took a breath. "Toi you ong. I love you, Grandpa." She turned back to David. "Did I say it right?" David knelt down and hugged her tightly, tears streaming down his face. "You said it perfectly, baby. Absolutely perfectly." They stayed at the cemetery until the sun began to set. Then David took Lily's hand and they walked back to the car together. "Daddy." "Yes. Are you going to keep helping people like Grandpa did?" "Yes, sweetheart. For as long as I can." "Good." Lily nodded with the serious gravity that only children can muster. "Because there are a lot of people who need help, and you're really good at helping." David smiled. "How did you get so smart?" "I learned from you." That night after Lily was asleep, David sat in his study surrounded by the evidence of his new life. Awards on the walls, letters from survivors, photographs of children who had been saved because of his work. On his desk was a small framed picture, the one from the safety deposit box. His father standing in front of an embassy in Hanoi. 1985. The day he had decided to fight. David picked up the frame and looked at his father's young face. So much had changed since that photograph was taken. So much had been lost, but so much had been gained too. "I did it, Dad," David whispered. "I finished what you started. The network is broken. Hundreds of people are in prison. Thousands of lives have been saved. And I'm training a whole new generation to continue the work." He set the frame down gently. "I wish you could have seen it. I wish you could have met Lily. I wish we had more time." He paused, feeling the weight of everything unsaid. "But I understand now. Why you did what you did. Why you kept it secret. Why you sacrificed so much. You weren't just gathering evidence. You were planting seeds, and those seeds have grown into something bigger than either of us could have imagined. David looked out the window at the city lights stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, children were sleeping safely because of his father's work. Families were together because of evidence gathered by a man with a mop. Lives had been transformed because someone had chosen to listen when everyone else looked away. I'm going to make you proud, Dad. Every day, for the rest of my life. That's my promise to you. The next morning, David arrived at his office at the United Nations to find a young woman waiting for him. She was maybe 20 years old. Nervous eyes. Hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Mr. Thompson, my name is Maria Santos. I saw your story on the news. She took a breath. I speak 6 languages: Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, English, and Haitian Creole. I learned them all from the families my mother worked for. I never went to college. I don't have any certificates, but I want to help. I want to do what you do. David smiled. Where are you from, Maria? Miami. My mother was a housekeeper. She cleaned hotel rooms until her back gave out. Now she lives with me in a 1-bedroom apartment, and we can barely pay the rent. Maria's voice broke. Everyone told me my languages were useless, that without a degree I'd never be anything but a maid, like my mother. But then I saw you on TV and I thought, maybe they're wrong. Maybe there's a place for people like me. David thought about his father, about all the invisible people who carried extraordinary gifts that the world refused to see. Maria, he said, tell me your story. She did. And when she was finished, David picked up the phone and called the head of his training program. I'm sending you someone special, he said. Give her everything she needs. Maria started crying. Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know how to repay you. You repay me by helping others. That's how this works. My father helped me. I help you. You help someone else. The chain never breaks. Maria nodded, wiping her tears. I won't let you down. I know you won't. As she left, David looked at the photograph on his desk one more time. His father's face seemed to be smiling. This was the legacy. Not the awards, or the headlines, or the arrests, but the chain of people helping people. Voice giving rise to voice. The invisible becoming visible. One person at a time. David Thompson had started his journey as a cleaner's son who spoke 11 languages. He had been mocked, arrested, humiliated, threatened with prison. A judge had laughed in his face and called him a liar. But he had proven them all wrong. Not through anger or revenge, but through truth, through courage, through the simple revolutionary act of refusing to be silent. His father had given him the gift of languages. But the greatest gift was something else. The understanding that every voice matters, that every story deserves to be told, that the invisible people of the world carry within them the power to change everything. David looked out his window at the city below. Somewhere out there, another child was being overlooked. Another talent was being dismissed. Another voice was being silenced. But not for long, because David Thompson was listening, and he would never stop.